your first word. Because a moral government ought to prioritize lives over money, I affirm the resolution. Resolved. The member nations of the World Trade Organization ought to reduce intellectual property protections for medicine. To clarify the resolution, I'll begin with some definitions. Merriam-Webster defines the verb reduce as to diminish in size, amount, extent, or number. Google Dictionary defines intellectual property as to which one may apply for a patent. Since the word ought in the resolution expresses an ethical obligation, the value or end goal of this debate is justice. And because a just government protects the lives of all people, the value criterion or method of achieving justice is maximizing human lives. Now on to my first contention. Millions of people in developing countries can't afford life-saving medicine because of stringent intellectual property protections. According to the London School of Economics and Political Science in 2014, 14 million people die every year from infectious diseases that are curable and preventable. This crisis is due to a lack of economic accessibility of life-saving medicines. For example, the cost of drug use for the treatment of bone cancer costs £114,000 for a full course. High prices can be attributed to patents which allow drug companies to gain a monopoly over the production of products, permitting them to fix prices at high rates to maximize profits. Millions of diseased people in developing countries lack access to life-saving medicine. Now on to my second contention. Reducing IPPs will allow for more medical development. A report from the Insider explained that only 43% of COVID vaccine manufacturing is currently being used because of pharmaceutical patents and secret keeping, according to William Meyer in 2021. According to UNICEF data, only 43% of COVID vaccine manufacturing is currently being utilized or approved for vaccines. This is because pharmaceutical manufacturers desire to protect their intellectual properties. If BioLice, a small pharmaceutical company in Canada, had started production this last year, they could have shipped over 1 million doses by now. To understand this, consider that under stringent patent protections, companies and countries who want to manufacture medicine cannot, because the molecular formula for creating the medicine, the certain type of microscope used to develop the medicine, or any other developmental tools restricts them from this development because of accessibility. Now on to my third and final contention. Reducing IPPs will direct companies towards medical production to save more lives. In its current form, the medical patent system not only limits profits for corporations, but also leads to the misuse of investment into repetitive, unnecessary medications. According to Aidan Hollis, a health economist for the WHO in 2004, the patent system does not effectively stimulate drug research and development. It induces research into drugs with little incremental therapeutic value. A novel reward system for pharmaceutical innovation in which innovators are rewarded based on the incremental therapeutic value of their innovation would lead to the best possible allocation of research investment. Next, medical patents incentivize companies to only seek out profit, resulting in millions of dollars poured into useless drugs. Removing patents would allow for investment to flow into pioneering new life-saving technologies. According to the same author on the same date, drug companies may obtain substantial rewards by developing products with relatively little incremental therapeutic value over pre-existing products. The incentives to innovate are distorted because the rewards to innovation are not based on creating therapeutic value, but on profitability. Estimates of R&D spending in pharmaceutical companies show that a large fraction of expenditures are targeted at the products offering little to no therapeutic improvement over existing drugs. That only 20% of R&D budget allocated to clinical testing is used for drugs which the FDA categorizes as significant improvement attracts more investment than is socially optimal. Other incentives besides IPPs are necessary for companies to develop medicine because they put the lives of people first. This might include rewarding companies for being able to stop the spread of the influenza virus by weakening the cough, instead of giving a company a lot of money for creating a medicine that stops acne breakout on the heads of CEOs. Now, also, in the next speech, the negative will try to claim that IPPs are necessary because they incentivize companies to develop new medicine. But when they say this, remember that there are other ways to do this that are better incentives because they prioritize people over money. And for all these reasons, I urge an affirmative ballot. Okay, I had a bit of time left there. Oh well.
Here's where everything properly looking. Oh boy. Okay, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, so when you say reduce, do you mean a total elimination of patents, or do you mean, what do you mean?
I mean that they should get rid of patents because there are other incentives that are better methods for contributing to innovation and also prioritizing people over money.
Thank you so much. So you're eliminating patents. Next, on to your idea about skewed incentives due to patenting. How does removing IPP protections on medicine? How does removing IP protections on medicine solve this distorted?
It solves this because IP protections are currently incentivizing companies to create drugs for useless medicines that have no therapeutic effect, according to Aiden Hollis.
But will these drugs, these useless drugs, still not be? Will they cease production or research into them just because we remove patents?
Can you repeat that?
If we remove patents, won't there still be a market for these so-called useless drugs?
Well, it wouldn't be necessary because it would go towards drugs that are actually beneficial to the world and people who are dying from preventable diseases.
Okay, but how can you ensure that this money will go to the people who need it instead of hair loss or acne?
From reducing IPPs?
Yeah.
Because the new incentives are based on a system that sees how these medicines are actually contributing to the global health. Like, for example, tuberculosis. If a company was able to create a medicine for... Okay.
Thank you. So you talk about this reward system. Can you give me an empirical example or historical example of such a reward system being implemented?
I can go through my evidence. Let's see.
Do you know of any, off the top of your head, where any?
Yes. In 2009, or at one point, one of the presidents was able to. One of the presidents implemented a new reward system that allowed companies to earn over $2 billion per year from licensing, even though there weren't patents, because his system, I think it was called PEFARI, I can't think of the name, but his system was rewarding those companies for creating viruses, or creating medicine that stops viruses.
Okay, so there's still licensing involved. Could you explain how licensing is involved in this system?
It was purely a governmental organization that just oversaw the production of these medicines and what effect they were having on the overall population.
What medicines were produced that saved lives, and could you give me any statistics on how many lives were saved?
Okay. For example, 10% of their patients pay millions. Not at the moment.
Okay. If you could show that to me during prep time, that would be great. You talk about all these manufacturing power that isn't currently being used to its maximum capacity. Could you tell me where primarily is this manufacturing power being wasted? Where do we find
I gave the example of BioLice, a pharmaceutical company in Canada that was unable to ship millions of doses of vaccines because of IPP protections.
Okay. Does Canada have a COVID-19 vaccine shortage right now?
No, they're a first world country. They've been able to effectively take care of it's the third developing countries that are struggling primarily from this disease.
Thank you so much. All right. Are we taking 3 minutes or 2 minutes of prep?
We have 4 minutes? What do you mean?
4 minutes of prep? Oh, shoot.
I think, yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry.
I'll take running prep starting now. Stop prep there.
Right.
Let me write it down so we're on 1:30. While my opponent may be demonizing the patent system as some horrible system that is ruining the lives of many, in reality, the patent system is necessary to ensuring that the pharmaceutical industry can continue and that people are getting the new medicines and new innovations that are needed to save their lives. Thus, I negate the resolution. The member nations of the World Trade Organization ought to reduce intellectual property protections for medicine. For the value, I agree with my opponent's value of justice, and I also propose the value criterion of maximizing lives. Now onto my first contention. That currently the patent system ensures that pharmaceutical companies are paid for the high costs that they face in order to produce these medicines. Pharmaceutical companies face high risk and low chances of success when starting development. The patent process is crucial to ensure that pharmaceutical companies have an incentive to continue. According to Grabowski et al., 15, several economic characteristics make patents and intellectual property protections important to innovation. Research and development process often takes more than a decade, and it involves more than $1 billion of costs. Only 1 in 8 drug candidates survive clinical testing. Patents do not guarantee demand, nor prevent competition from non-identical drugs. As a result, the strength of intellectual property protections plays a key role. As this evidence states, that making new drugs is a highly risky process. Without these incentives of the patents and knowing that if they do create that 1 in 8 drug, that they will have profits, no smart businessman would ever invest in such an endeavor. Next, without patents, there's no incentive to innovate and create new goods, and the patent process itself drives innovation. According to Marshall Phelps in 15, economics have demonstrated that inventors are driven by the expectation of profiting from owning the rights to inventions. Patents induce people to invest because of the prospect of profiting. Moreover, evidence that patents foster innovation is not confined to developed countries. Reforms strengthening the Taiwanese patent system stimulated additional inventive activity. Patents improve the allocation of resources by encouraging rapid experimentation and efficient transfer of knowledge. Without patenting, there would be no reason to create these new innovations, and without patenting, and patenting spurs further innovation, as given by this example of Taiwan, where it increased inventive activity and allowed for people to share ideas faster in order to create new inventions faster, because inventors know they can profit off of it. And finally, patents are crucial to medicine creation and production. According to Ray Bodum in 2008, The patent system attracts investments from companies who want to profit from the industry. The pharmaceutical industry is turning out new and beneficial drugs each year. 402 cancer medicines, 123 new treatments for heart disease and stroke, 83 new AIDS drugs, and 176 new drugs for neurological diseases. These new pharmaceuticals are the result of patent incentive. Obviously, without patents, there wouldn't be this incentive, and as shown in the past, patents have incentivized all these drugs, like cancer and heart disease drugs, and patents are spurring new innovation clearly. Now onto my opponent's case. My opponent's first contention is about affordability. However, affordability isn't the only reason that people cannot access the medicine that they require. According to Anthony Gatow in 2016, in poor countries, millions of people who don't have access to medicine against chronic disease, often the nearest clinic is a long walk from home, or no doctor is available, and sometimes the pharmacy doesn't have the treatment in stock. These companies do not have the capacity to care for patients suffering from these conditions. Cut the card there. What is happening right now is that in certain countries where my opponent claims that it's not affordable for them, it's also completely inaccessible. There's not the infrastructure. The root problem here is not patents. It's the fact that these countries do not have the medical infrastructure to proliferate these drugs. Also, waiving patents would be ineffective at increasing the accessibility of vaccines. According to Silverman in 2021, waiving intellectual property rights would have little effect. Moderna announced that it would not enforce IP rights on coronavirus vaccine. 5 months later, production of the vaccine remains entirely under the company's owned facilities. What this means is that even though these companies like Moderna have been reducing their IP enforcement of their own IP intellectual property, the fact of the matter is that these medicines are still not being produced. This ties into my opponent's second point, where there's apparently all these manufacturing sites that currently are being put to waste. However, it's not possible, even if they reduce the IP protections, without the help of the original creator to effectively make these drugs. It's not the problem of patents here, it's just the problem of the inability and the complicated logistics of the whole process. Also, all this manufacturing power that my opponent mentions in his second contention, he's only able to give examples in first world countries. The only meaningful way that would matter if there's manufacturing power being put to waste is if it was in these third world countries and these poor developing nations that are struggling to get access to the vaccine. Canada is almost entirely vaccinated. It doesn't matter if they already have the production power. It's the production power in these countries that my opponent claimed will get access to the medicine that matters, and my opponent is unable to prove that these countries will actually get the medicine. Finally, my opponent's third contention is completely irrelevant to the problem of patents. Reducing intellectual property protections or eliminating, as my opponent advocates for, would not fix any of these problems. Obviously, hair loss and acne are massive industries in the current world today, and especially in first world countries. Where there's a market for it, of course there's going to be development for it. It's not a problem of patents that we are spending money on such products. It's just the fact that people with money have it. This, my opponent's whole third contention is not a problem unique to patents or the patenting system. It's just how the market operates. Although these incentives and these drugs should not be a priority, there's nothing we can really do when it's just the problem with the market. Finally, on my opponent's alternatives, where he talks about a rewarding system. Let me remind you that in cross-ex, my opponent was able to provide no empirics of how many lives saves, instead saying that there was some boon to solving some virus issues and finding a medicine against them. However, none of these medicines ended up being meaningful, and none of these medicines, without my opponent able to provide a clear empiric, compares to this empirics that I brought above, where I talk about the 123 new treatments for heart disease and the 402 new cancer medicines. These are medicines that affect conditions that affect millions of people around the United States and affect millions of people around the world. These medicines are actively saving lives, and my opponent has not proven throughout this debate how reducing IP protections would save lives. Thank you.
Okay, I think I can go straight into cross-examination. Okay, you can start. You mentioned that companies are incentivized to create new medicine because there's a monetary reward, right?
I'm talking about the market here in this argument. I'm saying that there is a high demand.
Okay, let me rephrase this. So you first claim that patents are important because they give money and enough money back to these corporations that spend a lot of time and resources, and 1 in 8 passes, or whatever the statistic is, in order to develop these vaccines and medicine. And the ultimate result is a monetary reward, correct?
It's not actually a monetary reward. It's sole intellectual property rights to
But
this
what
medicine.
does this intellectual property ultimately amount to?
This allows them to have complete control of the proliferation of the drug that
But
they've
what
created.
if when they have complete control of it, can you agree that they earn a lot of money from it?
Well, of course, because they can do whatever they want with it.
Okay.
The thing is that we're saying that these
Okay,
inventors
so
deserve to own the drugs they make.
okay, so their ultimate goal with the patents is to be able to earn a lot of money so they can pay back.
I wouldn't say that. I would say it's to be able to own the invention that they have created.
That ultimately gives them money.
Well, of course, but the main
Okay.
thing is that they should be able to own and have access to what they've created, and not have other people stealing their ideas and basically laying waste to the whole incentive to create.
Okay. You also mentioned that manufacturing should not be manufacturing in first world countries should not be acknowledged because it doesn't apply to third world countries. Can you explain why, if a company can manufacture in a first world country, the same processes, if they have the resources, can go to a third world country?
Well, first of all, I'm saying that they can't produce the medicine. I'm saying that companies like Moderna have said that they won't enforce their IP rights over their medicine, and nothing has happened. The problem is that it requires the direct intervention of Moderna or the company that's producing the vaccine in order to produce the new drugs.
In Canada, this company was not able to produce millions of vaccines that could be shipped to these countries because of IPP protections. Why couldn't the same problem exist in other countries where they have manufacturing capabilities with those companies there?
Well, I'm skeptical of whether this factory actually had the doses already to be shipped out. I'm not sure. Maybe you could answer that for me in a later speech. However, I'm saying that most companies, and it's unfeasible for a different third-party company to produce a drug made by Moderna or Johnson & Johnson. As my Evan stated, it's extraordinarily difficult without the direct intervention of such a company. And at that point, so basically what it means is that this idea of just reducing IP protections and suddenly all these countries around the world can produce their own vaccine is false.
You also mentioned that there are new beneficial medicines created from these IPPs, correct? With all these ones for heart disease, HIV, things like that, correct?
I was giving examples, yes, of medicines created under the patent system.
All right. Why couldn't these medicines be created when there is the same monetary reward for creating these new medicine? Why would they suddenly vanish if governments were able to pay them the same amount they would earn from patents?
I don't think there is the same monetary reward. I don't think you've shown that the rewarding system works to incentivize, and I don't think that it's true.
So you still haven't responded though. If they are able to pay that amount of money, why couldn't they produce patents, or why couldn't they produce medicine without those?
I think the money gained from patent and a money gained from reward system would be rather incomparable. I think it's completely different.
I'll take prep. fine.
Actually, no, I was not keeping track of your prep time.
Oh no.
It's fine.
Okay.
I'll just add a minute to whatever time is put on here.
Because okay.
Okay. 217.
Okay, I just want to read this.
Do you want to write it down somewhere? 217.
Oh yeah. That's what I used, or what's
What you used.
okay? So, alright. Okay.
1 second.
B.
6 minutes, right? Oh, no, it's 4 minutes. I'm not.
Okay, you can start.
I'll start on your first word.
My opponent has time and time again in this debate tried to convince you that the root cause of innovation problems has been from IP protections not existing. But clearly, IP protections are not the only reason that companies innovate. Companies innovate in order to be rewarded so that they can pay back for their R&D costs and other expenses that go into the medical production process. Now on to my opponent's first argument under his case. He claims first that the costs for IPs are very high, and that also that investment also increases, or creating medicine also increases investment from outside sources, and also there are new and beneficial medicines. However, I have a response to all of these. Patents are often abused and collected to license out and profit off innovation by stagnating collaboration and discussion. Many large companies have a no patent, no talk policy. They will not collaborate with such approaches, and this presents a major barrier to collaboration. They use a mere 10% of their patents, pay millions in renewal fees, and they patent thickets that inhibit potential collaborators. So clearly, not only does patents reduce innovation because it stagnates collaboration between companies, but also this same principles can be applied under the affirmative of reducing patents, because government organizations will be able to pay companies for their production of vaccines in the same amount of money they would get from patents. Now on to the other affirmative case, where my opponent responds to my argument of costs being too high by claiming that there are other problems. There is another root problem, and that is distribution. However, you must recognize that without medicine, there is no way to distribute, because there's nothing to distribute. Medicines are the ultimate source of countries ultimately being able to inoculate their population and distribute to people who are dying from diseases like tuberculosis. While there may be a distribution problem, without medicine, it's irrelevant. And next to my argument where he responded also that Moderna had little effect because even though they reduced IPPs, this was only one example. In many other examples that I have listed, there have been companies that have priced their costs super high in order for other companies not to be able to afford it. And even though Moderna, in this example, Moderna didn't work, that is considered an outlier compared to others. And now my opponent also claims, and responding to my argument that there will be more manufacturing, that this examples only happen in first world countries and that manufacturing wouldn't occur in third world countries. But this argument is illogical because as long as IP protections are reduced, any company that is able to get rewarded from creating new medicine will go to any place in order to create new medicines and save lives. In the example of BioLice, even though it was based in Canada where they couldn't ship out millions of doses of vaccines, other companies that are like in Africa and those other poorer nations are simply stopped because they are unable to produce medicine because of IP protections. Oh no, okay. I didn't get to the last one. Alright.
Oh wait, do I have prep time? Sheesh.
Yeah, you do. You have, I wasn't
What time
keeping
is
track
it?
of yours.
I think we might just skip prep time. I think it might be. Oh, we don't. So that way you can get out.
Oh, okay, thank you.
I'll take 30 seconds. I realized I'm not connected.
You're not that cracked. You're sort of cracked. I'm just kidding. Alright.
Okay. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Starting. The affirmative team unfortunately banks on a miracle. A miracle that when we remove the patent system, suddenly all these countries and all these people who could not have medicine before, it'll be magically placed in their hands. However, due to problems of accessibility, where patents aren't even the root cause, this miracle, unfortunately, is impossible. First onto the line by line, we'll start on my opponent's idea of a rewarding system. Let me remind you that this system places an absurd burden on the government. Imagine that 5 companies produce non-identical drugs to solve the same problem. In my opponent's card above, where he talks about $2 billion of reward, that means the government is paying $10 billion for 5 drugs that essentially do the same thing. It's simply not feasible, and it's not a reasonable burden to place on the government. Now into my opponent's case, where he first talks about how without any given medicine at all, there's no proliferation. IP protections are still not the root problem. The root problem here is that these companies wouldn't have the infrastructure. There would be no way to manufacture these drugs to get it to these people. My opponent talks about how Moderna is an outlier on his contesting my responses on his second contention. However, Moderna simply exemplifies the problem. It's a proof of how that even if IP protections are reduced, it's extraordinarily difficult in order to manufacture and replicate these medicines. How is a third world country where people have to walk days to the nearest pharmacy supposed to magically build a factory that can produce all these drugs? Obviously, it's not feasible. My opponent in his next speech is going to talk about how there's people dying and there's this chance for increasing accessibility of drugs by removing patents. However, I must remind you that patents are not the root cause here. The root cause of this problem is a lack of infrastructure, an inability to manufacture. There's no one being barred from manufacturing except for in first world countries. The places where it matters, it's other problems that are at hand, and it's not the patent system, as I've shown throughout this debate. And let me remind you once again that my opponent's rewarding system is simply absurd and not feasible. There's no way that a government can compensate for all the money that a company would gain from instead just selling the drug themselves. The reward system is simply unfeasible and it's extraordinarily costly. Now onto my own case, where my opponent talks about how people abuse patents and create patent thickets and reduce collaboration. On the point about collaboration, I can actually argue that patents increase collaboration. The whole point of a patent system is that you release the information to the public in order to have the sole IP rights to that product. The whole idea of patents is about sharing information. Obviously, this leads to increased collaboration. On my opponent's argument about patent thickets, he's provided no examples of how patent thickets in the past have managed to stop new innovation. And when I provide you with the counterexamples of all the drugs produced under the patent system, obviously innovation is still occurring in these new drugs and pharmaceutical research and development is thriving. My opponent provides no clear examples, and in his next speech, do not let him provide any examples, as this would be too late in the debate. Now onto the two key voting issues. First, about paying companies and giving companies and inventors of medicines what they deserve. My opponent proposes a reward system. However, this simply doesn't work. How can the government compensate for all the money and all the financial success that a company experiences and all the growth it experiences when it has the sole IP protections? There are other non-monetary aspects that my opponent is ignoring, such as the company's growth, the internal infrastructure of the company developing, and it's allowing it to build a brand name within the public space. Obviously, paying $2 billion to every company that makes a new drug simply will not work. The patent system has proven it can work, is saving lives currently in the status quo, and there's nothing wrong with it, so why are we trying to fix it? The second voting issue is that about lives being saved. Right now, the patent system is saving lives. We are saving lives in the here and now, and we are creating a multitude of drugs to help people. We're creating cancer drugs, we're creating heart disease drugs, and these are all saving lives. However, my opponent's case banks on a bet, on a desperate gamble that, as I've shown throughout the debate, won't even pay off. That we should reduce patents in hopes that all these people will get medicine. However, the fact of the matter is that reducing patents won't give anyone new medicine. Reducing IP patents won't make the walk for people who walk days to the nearest pharmacy any shorter. It won't build any factories miraculously in a third world country or in a village isolated from the nearest urban center. Unfortunately, there's no way that reducing IP protections will save lives. And this is the crux of the debate. Our value criterion is to see who can save more lives, who can maximize human life. And when there's a system that's actively saving lives that my opponent wants to destroy, thus killing however many people are saved by these new drugs every year, and instead placing a gamble that won't even pay off, we can clearly see that you must vote for the negative. Because the negative prioritizes the lives of today and ensures the prosperity of people today, rather than gambling on uncertainty in the future, I urge a negative vote. Thank you. Should I start?
Yeah. Oh shoot, I went over time.
It's all good. It's a practice.
Yeah. Right. I thought it was at 30. Okay. Alright. Yeah, I gotta go. Alright. We can go. Right now, we are in the middle of a pandemic where millions of lives are being lost, hundreds to thousands every day because people are not vaccinated. My opponent continues to say, this is the best world we can possibly hope for, where people are dying because they do not have a vaccine, and as the Delta virus continues to spread when people are not vaccinated. But in the affirmative world, you can hope for a better world because we are able to give vaccines and medicine to those people who are in need and are dying today. I'll begin on my opponent's case, where he claims, and this is the same argument that's also argued on my case, that patents are the best incentive for collaboration. He cites the reason that no government would ever be able to afford to pay billions of dollars to companies. But he forgets to mention one thing, that the government is already doing this. Taxpayer money has already been going to increase patents for companies. And by leaving out this detail, it may sound convincing to you, but when you remember that there is already money being put into these patents from taxpayers, it's no longer this magical way for a government to be able to help companies produce these vaccines and medicine, because they already are. And next, on to my affirmative case, where my opponent claims that the Moderna example exemplifies the problem of more manufacturing not necessarily working. But this, again, you should ignore, because there are many companies that are able to ship vaccines to people but cannot, simply because they're not able to manufacture these vaccines. So by simply saying that one company wasn't able to do it means that all companies are not able to do it is illogical. And finally, in this debate, we move on to the voting issues. First, you should vote for the affirmative because countries still can't get access to medicine with costs being too high. And the only way we escape COVID-19, the only way we stop the proliferation of this new Delta variant is by getting people vaccinated across the globe. It's not staying in the status quo and saying, well, there's some medicine that's being created, so that's better than nothing. No, we want to stop this pandemic now. And on to the second voting issue, that companies will still be incentivized to create vaccines and patents or medicine because these patents are already paid for by the government. There's already taxpayer money going into this. So for these reasons, I urge an affirmative ballot.
Good
All right.
game.
You definitely beat me on this one, but I just have to get more evidence.